Can you imagine a disease so feared that, before it ever killed the body, it buried a person while they were still alive? In the Middle Ages, few things brought silence faster than the suspicion of leprosy. It was not only an illness, it was a warning to the community, a stain on reputation, a shadow that could spread through whispers long before any mark appeared on the skin. In medieval towns, daily life was crowded and close. Markets, narrow streets, shared bread, shared water, shared air. And in a world where people had little explanation for disease, fear became its own kind of medicine. It shaped how neighbors looked at one another. It decided who could be trusted, who should be avoided, who no longer belonged. Leprosy carried a special terror because it seemed to change the human body slowly, almost like a message being written in flesh. Even before the worst symptoms, the idea alone could turn warmth into distance. A familiar face could suddenly feel dangerous. Not because people were cruel by nature, but because they were trapped inside a culture that believed sickness had meaning. And when an illness becomes a symbol, the sick are no longer seen as people. They become evidence. They become warnings. They become something to remove, so everyone else can feel safe again. What leprosy was the most frightening part of medieval leprosy was how quietly it could begin. Not with sudden pain, but with small changes that felt almost harmless. A pale patch of skin, a numb finger, a wound that didn't hurt the way it should. In a world without medical understanding, those details were enough to trigger suspicion. Over time, the disease could damage nerves and skin, slowly altering the body's shape. Hands and feet could lose feeling. Injuries could go unnoticed. Burns and cuts could worsen without warning. To outsiders, it looked like the body was falling apart. To the person living it, it felt like losing control of their own flesh. But leprosy was also misunderstood. Many other skin conditions were mistaken for it. Ordinary infections, scars, rashes, and inflammation could be seen as signs of something far worse. And in the Middle Ages, a wrong diagnosis was not just a mistake. It was a sentence. Because once a person was labeled a leper, the label often mattered more than the truth. The disease didn't only affect the body. It reached into identity, relationships, and survival itself. The disease as divine punishment. In the Middle Ages, the question was rarely, how do we cure this? More often, it was, why did this happen? And many people believed they already knew the answer. Leprosy was seen as divine punishment, a judgment carved onto the body, revealing hidden sin as if the skin could expose the soul. This belief turned sickness into guilt. The sick person became more than ill. They became impure. Secluded, in sermons and stories, leprosy was described as a warning, a lesson for the living, a sign of what happens when someone falls from God's favor. And the fear grew deeper, because it was no longer only medical. It was spiritual. The cruel comfort of this idea was that it made the world feel ordered. If leprosy was punishment, then safety meant obedience. But disease does not follow morals. And when reality failed to fit the belief became stricter, not weaker. Even charity could feel complicated. Some offered food or coins, but from a distance, as if compassion was allowed only when it didn't require closeness. The leper became a symbol used to teach others, while their own humanity slowly disappeared behind fear. Judged by the living, imagine being told you are still alive, but no longer counted among the living. In parts of medieval Europe, the diagnosis of leprosy could be followed by a ritual that felt like a funeral. The person stood there breathing, yet their place in society was declared finished. They were treated as if they had crossed into a different world, a world of exile, restrictions, and silence. Friends hesitated. Families struggled. The community acted as if protecting itself meant erasing the sick person from daily life entirely. This judgment was not only public, it was permanent in meaning. The leper could lose their rights, their role, their name in the minds of others. They became someone outside the normal order, someone who existed, but not fully. And the most haunting part is that it often happened among familiar faces. People who once shared bread and work now looked away. The fear was stronger than memory. The fear rewrote relationships. From that moment on, the sick person was no longer simply ill. They were declared dangerous, not only to bodies, but to the fragile sense of safety the village tried so desperately to maintain. The expulsion. After the judgment came the separation that could not be ignored. Expulsion. The leper was pushed out of towns and cities, away from markets, churches, and crowded streets. In a world built on community, being cast out was not just loneliness. It was survival turned into struggle. Some were forced to wear special clothing. Others had to carry a bell, a sound meant to warn people before the leper even came close. It was a cruel system. The sick person had to announce themselves like a danger approaching, as if their presence alone was an offense. Imagine walking down a road and hearing that bell in the distance. Doors would close. People would step aside. Children would be pulled back. Fear became instinct. Distance became law. Even kindness was offered carefully. A piece of bread left on a stone. A coin tossed onto the ground. Help given without touch, without closeness, without recognition. The expulsion did more than remove a body from the city. It removed a life from participation, from belonging. And once someone was outside, returning was not just difficult. It was almost unthinkable. The leper houses. What happens to people a society cannot bear to see, but also cannot completely abandon? The answer, in many medieval regions, was the leper house. These places were built far from towns, separated by roads, fields, and distance that felt intentional. They offered shelter, but also confirmed isolation. A leper house might have simple rooms, a chapel, and small spaces for daily survival. To some, it sounded merciful, but the truth was that it worked like a boundary. The town could keep living normally, while the sick were kept out of sight. There is a strange detail in this system. Many leper houses received donations, land, and support from wealthy patrons. Giving to them could be seen as a spiritual act, a way to earn merit. But that support rarely came with closeness. Money crossed the distance. People did not. Inside, time moved differently. Life became repetitive, defined by routine, pain, and waiting. Outside, the world continued with weddings, harvests, festivals, births. The leper house became a quiet world beside the loud world, invisible to those who did not want to look. And so, even mercy carried a message. You may live, but not among us. Survival, not living. What does a day look like when you are alive, but treated as if you no longer belong to life? For many medieval lepers, daily existence was not about dreams or plans. It was about endurance, food, warmth, shelter, and the slow passage of time. Morning could bring hunger, cold, pain. And the hardest part was dependence. Many survived through charity, but charity was unpredictable and often humiliating. Coins were tossed. Bread was left at a distance. Help arrived without eyes meeting, without names spoken. Within leper houses, some people worked small tasks, mending cloth, carrying water, tending small gardens, anything that could keep the body moving and the mind from collapsing into silence. Prayer was common, not only from faith, but from necessity. When the world abandons you, belief becomes a place to stand. But the deeper wound was emotional. Touch disappeared. Friendship became rare. The simple comfort of being near someone without fear was gone. And over time, many began to see themselves through the eyes of the world, not as human, but as danger. Survival continued. But living, as the town understood it, was no longer offered. Fear over facts. The Middle Ages feared leprosy as if it were unstoppable, as if it could leap from person to person with a glance, a breath, a touch. Without science, imagination filled the gaps. And imagination created rules harsher than the disease itself. People believed the air around a leper was poisoned, They feared clothing, cups, market stalls, door handles. They feared the idea that impurity could spread beyond the body, into homes, into families, into futures. The fear became so powerful that it shaped entire communities. In some regions, lepers were forbidden from entering public spaces. In others, they were forced to stand at a distance when speaking. The bell they carried was not only a warning, it was an announcement of separation, a reminder that this person existed, but should not come closer. The tragic irony is that leprosy is not easily transmitted. Most people are naturally resistant, but medieval society did not know that. And because it didn't know, it punished people for something they did not choose. Fear replaced facts. Fear became law. And once fear becomes law, it is almost impossible for a sick person to be seen as anything other than a threat. The truth revealed. Centuries later, the mystery finally broke. Leprosy was discovered to be caused by a bacterium. It became something explainable, treatable, real, in a way medieval minds could never fully grasp. The monster lost its supernatural mask, but the discovery also revealed something unsettling. Much of the suffering lepers endured was not created by the disease itself. It was created by fear, by misunderstanding, by the need to blame someone when life felt uncertain. There is another painful detail. Many medieval lepers likely had different conditions entirely. Skin illnesses, injuries, infections, even simple marks could be mistaken for leprosy. And once labeled, the person was rarely forgiven by society. Science gave the disease a name, but history reminds us that naming a disease is not enough. The hardest part is what humans do while they are waiting for answers. The cruelty that grows in the absence of knowledge. Leprosy became a lesson not only in medicine, but in how quickly a community can turn away from its own people when fear feels stronger than truth. A lesson from history. What if the darkest part of this story is not the illness, but the way it shaped human behavior? The Middle Ages teach us that fear does not simply protect. Fear also destroys. It creates distance, rules, exclusions, and rituals that feel reasonable, until you see what they do to a person's life. The medieval leper faced more than wounds. They faced social death, a slow erasing of identity, a world that continued without them, as if they had already disappeared. And the most haunting truth is that much of that suffering came from people who believed they were doing what was necessary. History does not repeat in the exact same way, but it echoes. Whenever the unknown becomes shame, whenever illness becomes blame, whenever fear becomes policy, something medieval returns, a shadow of the same instinct to isolate what we do not understand. Leprosy was real. But the greater monster was built by human imagination, and that is why this story still matters. Because fear can infect a society faster than any disease. If you want more historical stories told with calm, cinematic detail, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with the era you want to explore next.